Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar from Kelso Consulting, where we're looking at all about how to get very maximum impact from your practices, thought leadership. We've got quite a lot of people on who know Kelso Consulting already and plenty of people who don't, so I'll just introduce myself and the business. First of all, I'm Tim Priceman. I'm director with Kelso Consulting. I've been advising all sorts of consultancies for well over 20 years, whether management, strategy, business psychology, IT, all sorts of consultants, both on building their reputations generally, getting high impact press coverage, and also on creating high impact thought leadership campaigns. And indeed I have 4 national awards for this, and I am the author of the book The Thought Leadership Manual, which is clearly an ideal present for colleagues and loved ones and is available on Amazon. I won't be giving too many more advertisements for it, but I hope you'll forgive me for that one. Kelso Consulting, we are public relations consultants. We're all about building powerful reputations for our clients. Ultimately, in the world of consultancy and indeed the broader business to business world, it's credibility that sells and reputation that opens the doors to decision makers. So we're all about helping businesses build those sorts of reputations that allow them to have the credibility to get to meet the people they want at the highest levels in whichever sort of business they're targeting. And this is certainly about, for many of our clients, part of that is getting the national media coverage that gives them that reputation. But it's not just that, it's all about things like case studies, speaking at events, having articles published, whether in the media, on your website, building a digital reputation, particularly on LinkedIn, gaining awards in certain areas, dealing with analysts, and of course creating thought leadership is all about all parts of building up a powerful reputation. What we're going to be covering today is, as the title of webinar suggests, all about maximising its impact, the business development impact, the PR impact, but we'll also be looking a little bit about creating strong thought leadership, because ultimately if you don't have good thought leadership, that is always going to create problems for you from the get-go. And we're going to start by having a little look about why consultancies do thought leadership, because thinking through that again helps you maximize the impact when you're clear on what it is you are looking to achieve. In terms of housekeeping questions, this is a 1-hour webinar. We'll be having time for questions at the end, but do fire them through in the meantime using the question box if they're on a particular aspect we're discussing, and I will be able to tackle them as we go along too. Just to let you know, after this webinar you'll be getting a recording of it, you'll be getting the video, you'll be getting the podcast. You're very welcome to share these with colleagues. You'll also be getting a very succinct recommended reading list. You'll be getting various emails from us as well with links and other recommended reading. You're very able to opt out of those if you don't, but I took a lot of time crafting them to make sure they're interested, so I hope you will have a look at them. And a colleague of mine will give a call as well to see if you would like to discuss any aspects with us, or indeed meet up with me or a colleague from Kelso at some point in the near future. Okay, so why do management consultancies do thought leadership? Well, it has a very long and successful history powering the growth of consultancies of all size. Everyone here is probably familiar with the McKinsey Quarterly, which started coming up for 60 years ago. But all sorts of big consultancies, quite frankly, churn it out. But it's very powerful for small consultancies, and indeed we have worked not just with big consultancies, but with small consultancies that have used thought leadership to as part of their strategy for fighting big consultancies in their niche, to prove that they have the intellectual firepower that outguns perhaps the bigger practices. Big practices always have resources and global reach, but smaller consultancies, niche consultancies, can use thought leadership to prove that in their area they're every bit as good and maybe better. It's worth just spending a second thinking about what thought leadership is, because I can guarantee if you get 5 people in a room, they'll all think it's different things. Now, it certainly can be insights from research. Ultimately, you want to have proof points, you want to have evidence. Research gives these. It may unearth interesting findings as well. So it can be research, but it could be thought-provoking white papers, articles, maybe even videos. It could be the analysis of data and trends as opposed to surveys. Ultimately, it could be observations, particularly if you're very experienced in an area, if you've been involved in leading edge projects, or if you particularly follow developments in the sector carefully and are more informed than other people, as long as these are backed by evidence. If it's no evidence there, quite frankly, it's just opinion and conjecture. And for some areas, it can be campaigning on a particular issue to lead opinion, or perhaps lead regulators or others in tackling a particular issue. Thought leadership could even be hosting some sort of event, some sort of landmark event where the key people get together and decide things. I mean, the ultimate example of that is Davos, but you don't have to be hiring an entire Swiss ski result and getting world leaders in. It can be done on a much smaller scale, because it's about the quality, not the scale, that matters. But I think it's worth also thinking about what thought leadership isn't, as there is a trend, particularly amongst American and Americanized firms, to call anything thought leadership and just rebrand your existing marketing as thought leadership. But clearly thought leadership implies thought, it implies leadership in it. So your routine press releases announcing new hires, new offices, day-to-day comment, your newsletters about partners joining, things like that, that is not thought leadership. I'm not saying you shouldn't do them, but don't kid yourself, it's thought leadership. The low-quality, cut-and-paste clickbait articles that SEO agencies recommend for people to get more traffic to your website, there's certainly a use for those. Some businesses find them valuable, but they're not thought leadership. Highly technical output invariably isn't. Brochures, sales pitches, that sort of thing. Me Too articles, or anything where you avoid expressing some sort of opinion, typically aren't very thought leading. And data surveys without any insight are not thought leadership. I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing these, but you shouldn't be kidding yourself. These are thought leadership. We're here to talk about things that are genuinely going to get people's interest, particularly at a senior level, that will allow you to engage with them. In fact, it's very important for management consultancies to be doing this. Many do, some try and don't quite get to it, and others fail, maybe, or just don't do it. But it is one of the only 3 proven ways to change a management consultancy's reputation, according to some in-depth research by 2 professors, one from the Sade Business School, one from Exeter University Business School, that was presented to the MCA a couple of years back from memory when I attended. The 3 ways are changing partner or senior consultant behaviour, and we all know how difficult that can be. They found detailed and specific case studies of projects you've done in a leading area can be very effective, although it did come with a health warning that if they sounded too needy, that actually put clients off. But certainly they were very powerful. And finally, good quality thought leadership in areas you want to build your reputation was very powerful. So if you want to change your reputation, if you want to be seen as experts in areas you're not, if you don't have any case studies and you're struggling to get your partners to talk to their clients about your expertise in it, really the only thing that's going to make a proven impact is thought leadership. That's not to say other areas didn't change reputation, it's simply that they couldn't find any evidence that they did. Ultimately, thought leadership for most consultancies is they need to engage, you need to engage with senior decision makers. If it's big companies, it's C-suite, or maybe the level below. With owner managed businesses, it's typically the owner, maybe the finance director, marketing director. But typically these people are not receptive to sales calls until they are in buying mode. But the senior sales catch-22 is that they're not in buying mode, or rather when they enter buying mode, they've largely decided already who they're going to use. So this presents a problem, particularly for consultancies looking to build outside their existing network, is how do you get through to the door before they've already decided who they're going to use. And thought leadership, good thought leadership, not poor thought leadership, but good thought leadership is a very powerful mechanism of this. And I won't run through all the research. You can look at it afterwards. You can go online and look at it. But there's been plenty of research done in this area over the years, indeed on a regular basis by both LinkedIn and Edelman, who a big global PR agency, into the impact of thought leadership. But ultimately it's very powerful for engaging early in the sales process. So that's why consultancies are doing it. The second bit I wanted to talk about for getting a big impact when you are doing it is about creating strong thought leadership. Now, first of all, it's about getting the strategy right from the outset. And an important part is being really clear who is your target. Now, what I would say is that a lot of times consultancies and indeed others don't get content that's appropriate for their target. So they are aiming for the board and the C-suite, who are all about policies, resources, strategies, sort of big issues that are discussed at board, and they simply target them with lots of operational and day-to-day content, which is actually more appropriate for middle management. A good example of this is cybersecurity and IT consultants who want to be dealing with the board, and yet their approach for dealing with the board is try to educate them in detailed cybersecurity technical issues. It's not going to happen. Boards don't want to be the IT expert. They want to be talking about protocols, policies, strategy, resourcing, that sort of side of things. So you need to deal with them at that sort of level. Whereas if you're targeting the CTO, then you need to be targeting the CTO in the language they understand. If you want to be targeting the logistics manager, then you need to be dealing with him or her in the language that they deal with. Secondly, once you're clear on who you're targeting, think about the journey they are on, their buyer's journey. And what I would say as an observation across most B2B businesses, particularly consultancies, is there is too much emphasis on the end of the journey where people have decided what they're going to do and they're simply either comparing different suppliers or ultimately justifying why they are using a particular supplier. So this is things like company details, credentials, testimonials, sales messages. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing that sort of stuff, very important indeed, but as we discussed earlier, they've usually decided who they want to use by this stage. It's the incumbents to lose rather than yours to win, unless you're the incumbent, in which case make sure you don't lose it. But not enough emphasis is done on engaging earlier in the funnel rather, but clearly that is where most of the decisions are made. So think about the journey the person you are targeting is going on, so you're producing thought leadership that engages them early in the tunnel so that you can have the meeting and be the incumbent, rather than at the later stage where they're simply benchmarking the incumbent against you. The third thing, and this is a really important action, if there's only one thing you do from this webinar, and I hope you'll do several things, but if there's one thing you do, it's create a definition of thought leadership for your firm. I've put a couple of alternatives here. Well, the first one is the one we use at Kelso Consulting that features in my book, second plug, and the alternative one is Clifford Chance. If you're not familiar with Clifford Chance, they're one of the world's largest law firms, top financial and corporate law firm. For them, they even have a thought leadership board that sets policies. It doesn't manage individual projects. It sets policies and makes sure the firm is being a thought leader in its area. And its definition is that thought leadership is views expressed by Clifford Chance that are forward-looking, contain intellectual content, progress the discussion on a given issue, have a different angle on an existing theme or makes new connections, and has a cross-border practice or sector element. It is notable that Clifford Chance, one of the top law firms in the world, has a definition of thought leadership that doesn't contain the word legal, law, regulation or compliance anywhere in it. So what I would ask you to do is create a definition for your firm. And this is particularly important because going back to our previous discussion, everyone will have a different idea, different definition of what thought leadership is. And quite frankly, as the campaign goes on, there will be all sorts of pressures, first of all to label any old stuff as thought leadership, and secondly to water down the quality because of the need for convenience, expediency, pressing deadlines. People can't face putting in the extra rigor, whatever it is, and having a definition that you've worked on with colleagues that everyone's agreed in allows one of the most important backstops, if I could use that expression in the context of this, not Brexit, one of the most important backstops, which is a definition that sets a floor on what your thought leadership is. If it goes below it, it's not thought leadership, so you must be aspiring to achieve it. And in fact, not just aspiring, but ensuring it is achieved, so that things that don't meet it aren't thought leadership and either aren't allowed or aren't in the thought leadership program and go elsewhere. So, again, how do we prevent weak thought leadership? Now, in terms of creating strong thought leadership, I'm not going to go through all of that, but I will mention a few things. But it's covered much more fully, both in my book and also from other webinars we have available around creating thought leadership on a budget and that sort of thing. But first of all, if you want to prevent weak thought leadership and indeed generate good, strong thought leadership, first of all, getting the themes right. Now, I would strongly argue that the right place for thought leadership is where megatrends intersect with topical issues that are either industry specific or specific to a particular theme you want to do. Why is that the important juncture? Well, a megatrend means you're going to have a long shelf life with this issue. If it's something that's here today, gone tomorrow, then you are constantly having to rerun campaigns on different themes, whereas if it's a long-running trend, you can own it and exploit it. You're building intellectual capital for a long term. But with these themes, if there's nothing topical about them, then it lacks a so what, both for the people you're targeting or indeed if you're looking for press coverage for the media. So there need to be topical elements to it. Why now? And of course it needs to be relevant to the group of people you're targeting. So as an example, what is a mega trend? Well, it's all these big things that move at sometimes a tectonic level, but certainly they are the big issues that shape in the world around us. This could be e-commerce, it could be robotics, it could be smart drugs, it could be Internet of Things. These are typically, but not always, driven by technology, and they create challenges for the world around us. The challenges from climate change, energy demand, wealth polarisation, rent not own, urbanisation, all of these sorts of things. And they're creating interesting developments, the smart grid, connected car, connected healthcare, autonomous vehicles. So in the creative sessions I run with people looking for thought leadership, start with what are the mega trends that are particularly affecting the people you are looking to target, and what are the challenges that have been thrown off from that you are looking to help them solve. Secondly, it goes without saying that it's important to invest the time up front getting it right. Although the pressure to get something out and consultant time and things like this, actually, while it's obvious truism, it's the thing that doesn't happen, and then that causes problems all down the line. People have a quick meeting, 25 minutes, hook on an interesting theme, everyone thinks it's wonderful, dump it on the marketing manager, move on. Well, clearly that isn't going to work, albeit that is most people's undoing. Your thought leadership ultimately needs to express clear, distinctive, strategic viewpoints. You are a consultancy, you are helping your clients deal with the big strategic and other issues that are facing them. Your viewpoints need to express that. Again, with consultants, it gets so wrapped up in, if you're not careful, in consultancy speak, in business school jargon, in theoretical models. I would suggest that most of your clients are not interested in this sort of thing. They want areas where it's you get to the point quickly, immediately, clearly and distinctively. And if you're not doing that, it's back to the drawing board. And indeed, this is the most important lesson from the consultancies that create regular thought leadership and whose thought leadership is seen as amongst the best regularly in the consultancy sector. What they do is have a tough peer review. At the start, you need to test your initial hypothesis. And what I would say is, if you're going into thought leadership thinking we'll do some research and see what we find, you're going to sadly spend a lot of time hunting around and not find anything. Both my book and some of the other webinars talk about how you need to start with a hypothesis and prove the hypothesis and how you go about creating that. But those hypotheses need to have a tough peer review from your colleagues, and I would strongly urge some clients and other people you can trust as well. How interesting do they think they are? Get them to score it on a score sheet. Create one. Ultimately, if you aren't getting, wow, this sounds interesting, would love to hear from it, and you're getting a bit so-so, not of the moment, there's lots of it about, then that's a good early warning that you need to go back to your hypotheses and work them harder. And then with your findings and conclusions, don't just write them up and punt them out to the world, keeping them a secret till launch day, which is indeed what a lot of people do. Or you feel, oh my goodness, we've got to rush them out before someone beats us to the punch. And that's a legitimate thing to be worried about. But ultimately, what you need to be doing is getting colleagues and even clients to again score your findings and conclusions to make sure they are genuinely interesting and distinctive. And if you're not getting that, you need to go back and work harder on them, not least because weak thought leadership is going to cause problems in the campaign. But if you are regularly producing thought leadership, what we find is you are judged by your weakest, not your strongest thought leadership. And if it's inconsistent, people will be less likely to look at subsequent thought leadership because they'll think, the last lot wasn't much cop, why waste our time looking at the next one? So, we've talked about why do it. We talked about why, how to make it as strong as possible. Next, we want to talk about maximising the commercial impact with the content you have produced. Now, there's a number of things I'd say here. If you are newish to thought leadership, it's very tempting to go to think, well, we need to just launch with a really big project and wow people. I would suggest that this is the equivalent of going from being a couch potato to sprinting. The reality is that you're going to pull your muscles pretty early on and end up limping along and not making a great impression. So I would strongly urge you to build up your thought leadership muscles rather than just go for the biggest project you can. Building up's very straightforward. Start writing some articles, start writing some blogs, start having discussion dinners with your clients. Then move on to a white paper, or maybe doing a webinar such as this. Start and build up rather than go from naught to try to go from 0 to 70 in one leap. Secondly, I would say, again, if you are new to it, or indeed if you just do it as a series of unconnected projects, start seeing thought leadership as a process, not an event, not a one-off, but see it as a process, how you are building knowledge in your team, how you're communicating that, how you're exploiting that, how you are building up and sustaining regular activity to create the thought leadership position in your sector or amongst your targets. The key element, though, is whether you are doing something small or doing something big, have a plan for exploiting it, but create that plan early in the process. In fact, if you're going to do research or going to do something big, before you do it, create the plan for exploiting it so that you know whatever effort you put into it, you're going to be able to make the most of it. And indeed, this is a big faux pas which leads to large amounts of management consultancy, thought leadership reports sitting in cupboards and not being exploited, is people put so much effort into creating it, it arrives on their desk, they go with big sigh of relief, oh thank heavens that's done, let's get back to the billable hours, and then 6 months later nobody's done anything with it, because it's always easy to have business development pushed out by billable hours or all the other elements that go into run into a business. So make sure you have that plan before you even start on your thought leadership. And you might think, well, our plan will depend on what it says. So again, this is a big mistake. You're going to put a lot of effort into it, so you need to exploit it whatever it says. And secondly, you want to actually go into your thought leadership, have a pretty good idea of what it's going to say anyway. And we talk more about how you ensure that it's going to be interesting in other webinars. So the key is have the plan to exploit it before you even start embarking on spending lots of time creating it. The other thing is people have a plan. They'll say, oh, we'll do a launch and then see what next. Again, this suffers from exactly the same problems I mentioned earlier. That plan you create at the outset should cover a period of 6 or 9 or 12 months of exploiting it, not a launch and then 3-week rollout. Yes, you want to launch in a 3-week rollout, but you want to be knowing what you're doing in the next quarter, the quarter after that, right through to the end of the year. This plan needs to be really clear on who is doing what, when they're going to do it, and how much of that activity they're going to be doing it. So if it involves for instance, sending this out to your clients and calling them up to get a presentation meeting, we need to, rather than just have some good intentions in there, we need to have some specifics about it, and it needs to have a bit of common sense as well. If you know someone has never bothered calling clients to follow these things up in the past, it isn't realistic to expect they're going to do it. So have some alternatives around things like, okay, if you want to phone people up, and that's the way to get meetings, and partner Joe or Joanne blogs doesn't do it. How are you going to do it? Who's going to do it? Are you going to have a telesales people? That sort of thing. And ultimately, there needs to be some accountability and metrics to make sure these things are happening, rather than we all look back at the end of it 9 months later and it was like, sorry, I didn't do that. I got caught up with a project. The bigger the campaign you're doing, the more complex an operation it is, and the more specialist skills you are going to need. If you're writing an article, emailing it to 20 of your clients and calling them up, then that's a relatively straightforward operation. If you want to have a video, if you're going to be analysing lots of data, if you want to come at the top of Google, if you want to get, if you want to be approaching people with a campaign on LinkedIn, if you want to get lots of press coverage, it starts, if you want to get 50 meetings rather than 5 with people outside your network, etc., etc., it becomes a much bigger operation. The skills are broader. You need to make sure that you have all of these skills within your team. It's certainly a big ask to think that the marketing manager is an expert in all of them. It's also worth thinking about some of the roles within it. Yes, it's very easy to think about, okay, someone's going to do the writing, someone's going to do the design, but the bigger the project, the more you need governance, you need leadership, you need project management, you need who's going to be the creative one, who has the knowledge on the subject, who has the knowledge on the people you're targeting, who's particularly good at research. So the bigger the project, the more you need to make sure that you've got these skills within your team, or that you're bringing them in, because otherwise, if you don't have these skills, then you're going to start having problems, either in terms of getting things done quickly enough, or in terms of impact, or in terms of quality control. But what is the secret to getting the very, very most from your thought leadership? What can we learn from the world's most successful thought leadership projects? They are repeated. And they are repeated, they are repeated, and they are repeated. Going back to the McKinsey Quarterly, it's been running 60 years for a good reason. The reason is because success can build, the best foundation for success is indeed past success. It's not just the McKinsey Quarterly as well. What I'll do afterwards is send you through a case study of the Deloitte football industry work, which ultimately over a period of 30 years has built up from 3 people in partners doing it in their spare time to an industry leading practice with 40 or 50 people and a huge range of leading football clubs and indeed other professional sports as well. This has been done through running effectively the same bit of research 30 years, and innovating and building up each year from what was a good start but fairly simple. It was a benchmark of the accounting policies of what was then First Division football clubs, and is now a landmark report, and they have various things like the Football Money League and this, that and the other, which firmly sets Deloitte in that sector as the leaders by a long way. But the lesson from that and all the other ones is repeat it. Repeat particular things you do, repeat the process. So if you're targeting a particular sector and you do some sort of report or research, repeat it. Maybe not every quarter, but maybe annually or every 2 years. If you have an approach that works in one area, repeat that approach in another area. So again, you have the process knowledge of it, and ultimately, if you repeat something, it becomes more and more automated. You can delegate it down, whereas you have more and more accumulated knowledge of how to promote it, and so you can be more successful each time. So again, repeat, repeat, repeat. Maximising the PR impact of it. Well, I think with journalists, there's certain things I'd like to say about that. The first of all, it's very easy for consultancies to think, particularly smaller ones, is, oh, we're a small consultancy, we're not in London, we are not of interest to national media, whether newspapers, trade publications or whatever. So I would say to you, particularly, don't aim low. There is absolutely no law that says the Times can't quote or feature reports or interviews from people outside London. In fact, they're very keen to, albeit they find it slightly hard to engage. And obviously, if you want to interview someone on some subject, then and you regularly getting stuff from PwC or Deloitte or Bain or whoever, then they're going to be top of mind, and naturally you'll go to them. So there is that to overcome, but it's not a problem. In fact, if you have interesting and strong things to say, the national media very much want to hear from you, and we've got great case studies of that happening from our own personal experience with niche consultancies with 5 or 10 people who are getting in The Economist and FT and elsewhere. But it's all about the quality to start with. Secondly, you want to get into a publication, you need to ensure it's relevant to their readers. Now, management consultancies will think something like, okay, we want to target CEOs. CEOs read the FT, ergo it's of interest to the FT. Well, it isn't as simple as that, because the FT knows that most of its readers are, some of them aspire to be CEOs, some of them are CEOs, but the vast majority of them aren't. And typically, all publications see their readers as, particularly national newspapers, voters, investors or employees. So they need angles that are relevant to them. So as voters, it's what is the public policy? Why should I be concerned about that? They see their readers typically not as institutional investors, but as small investors who either put shares in their ISA or who have a pension fund that invests in shares. So they see their people as investors, and typically, and you can check this out by reading most of the articles in the FT or columns or things like this, they see their readers as not CEOs but employees. The typical FT reader they would see as someone relatively sort of middle ranking upwards in a big financial institution, in a big professional services firm, or maybe a FTSE 100. They certainly, the FT doesn't write exclusively for CEOs, it writes inclusively for a wide range of employees. And you must bear this in mind, because the journalist thinks, how will this be of interest to my broad range of readers? And you need to have angles that cover that, not just this is tough for CEOs, this is what they need to do. That has a very limited appeal. The next thing is about timing. You have a choice in terms of your timing. You can either say that, you can either look for when your issue that you want to talk about is likely to be of interest to journalists and piggyback on articles they are going to be writing about. And I would strongly urge that this is the best tactic. The tactic that a lot of people do, though, is they think, okay, 20th of May is our launch date. That works for us because that's really good. So we want the PR launch date on the 20th of May, and we're going to persuade journalists that they should be writing about our issue on the 20th of May rather than all the other things happening in the world. You will see that this is actually quite a hard tactic to pull off. Clearly, PR agencies like me work around these things and have our ways of dealing with it, but ultimately it's a big ask that you're expecting the journalists to drop everything else they've got on their agenda for that day and write about your thought leadership. So I would strongly urge you to think in terms of timing, not be driven, particularly if you're going for the media, but the same applies to your clients and prospects as well. Don't be purely driven by internal imperatives. Look at what's happening in the rest of the world. When is this going to be most impactful with the media or with whoever you're targeting? The same for how you view journalists. It's very tempting, and probably if you read basic PR textbooks or you've been on the Chartered Institute of Marketing, that you see dealing with journalists as very much a transactional thing. You want to get coverage, you send them a press release, they write about it. That's the end of it. But our industry is called public relations for a reason. It's all about relationships. These may be relationships with members of the public, but in this case, the same applies with journalists. You are going to get far more coverage by building a relationship with them, and a relationship, the best way to start the relationship is to build it up rather than to drop your great, wonderful, finely crafted thought leadership report on the lap of someone who's never heard of you and expect them to devote the rest of their day to reading it rather than deal with all the other things they've got on. So again, think about building up the relationship for when you particularly want it rather than just expecting them to drop everything on behalf of you, a complete stranger. The way to think about it is the same with a sales process. Sales processes are relatively long, they involve cultivation and they take time, and ultimately you are the seller and you are having to really dance to the tune of the buyer. In this relationship, the journalist is the buyer, you are the seller. They are making a payment and they are under no illusion of the value of press coverage to you. That is how they make the payment. You are selling interesting ideas, interesting insights, but they have lots of other people selling at the same time to choose from. So you need to do things in a way that works for them, not be driven by this is important to us, ergo the journalist must write about it now. And the final thing is the best way to get into the world's top media, or indeed the UK's top media, a press release. Now, press releases are very important. They're a good way of wrapping up all the information in a succinct form a journalist can process. But ultimately, what a journalist really wants is something exclusive and interesting, and a press release goes to everybody. So I would say you need to be thinking about this when dealing with the key publications. Press releases are great for getting coverage in a range of second and third tier publications, or indeed if you've got something completely amazing and earth-stopping that you can just punch it out to everyone and the world will report on it. But typically management consultancy thought leadership isn't quite up there. It's something that needs a bit of a selling in, Journalists will want to do it on an exclusive basis. That means they get first dibs on it ahead of it going out more widely. So don't fall into the trap of thinking, write a press release, punt it out, that's the way it's done. That isn't the way it's done if you want to get into top media. So I just thought it'd be worth running through a few signs if you're already doing thought leadership or you're about to embark on a program that you need to look out for, that things will go badly and you're not going to get the impact you're looking for. First of all, as mentioned or alluded to anyway, everything's got dumped on the marketing manager after a meeting on top of all their other jobs. Realistically, these are often, particularly the bigger the project, is this really realistic? You decide what to do after the things, after you've completed it. No, do it before. Your plan is covering a few weeks of activity. No, it needs to cover 9 months of activity. Your plan's success revolves around getting lots of press coverage. As a public relations consultant, clearly we are in the business of delivering lots of press coverage. But ultimately, journalists are some of the world's most unreliable, flaky individuals. What I always urge people when we're doing thought leadership campaign is that your campaign, which you are investing a lot of time, effort and probably resources in, should be a success if you get no press coverage. If you get press coverage on top, then clearly that gives a huge boost and that is an extra icing on the cake. But what your business development plan is to create the cake so that you feel the campaign is a success regardless of press coverage, because ultimately these people are they dance to their own tune, not to yours. You need to make sure your tune is a very successful one. And the real killer is everything is being run through a committee. It's the best way to make sure your thought leadership is uninteresting. Things, it's consensorial rather than leading. And we all know the logistical problems of getting everyone together in the committee, and then when you turn up at the committee and it's all around who hasn't done what rather than what needs to be done next. So definitely have a working group on it, but it needs to be a small working group, not some sort of political committee. Okay, so we've talked about lots of the things that need to happen to make sure you do get impact, but ultimately the thing that really drives new meetings, new clients, is someone picking up the phone and ringing people and selling it in. And these are if this isn't happening, if you people are promising to do this but there's no evidence that they've done it in the past, then you're always only going to get limited business development results without follow-up phone calls. So either you need to do it, or one of the team needs to do it, or you need to have a telesales agency doing it. Some people react with horror at the idea of telesales agencies. Well, you shouldn't. It's very straightforward. You get a good one and you get them to follow up something strong that you send through to them in a timely way that has a clear next step, such as getting on a webinar like this, attending an event, whatever. So it's all about creating that funnel within your plan so you are clear of what's going to be happening to exploit it to get the meeting. So we'll be moving on to questions in just a minute. A little few details about how Kelso Consulting helps businesses create great thought leadership and indeed exploit it. So we do have a start to finish support for thought leadership initiatives, right from the very outset, through to planning, through to helping you create it, through to successful launch, media launches, social media, LinkedIn advertising, that sort of thing. And indeed talking about sorts of funnels and helping you create funnels so that there's a clear process to bring people from someone on the mailing list or someone who comes in through the website through to a meeting and ultimately through to a client. But we also provide specific services. We provide a sort of launchpad service that helps you just sort of scope one. We do a creativity workshop to get breakthrough insights. We have a sales maximizer workshop where we create in detail the sorts of plans we've been talking about. And we also have something called Thought Leadership Rescue, which if you didn't use us on earlier stages and you've spent a lot of time and resources on thought leadership, you've launched it, it's been a bit of a flop, you want someone to breathe life back into it, that is exactly what we're able to do with our Thought Leadership Rescue service. I'd just like to flag up, we also have a range of webinars. Some of them are like this. These are live ones, but other ones are recorded ones, which you can access now. Do see them on our website, kelsopr.com/seminars. Okay, questions? Okay, question from Paul. Thank you very much, Paul, on what are my tips for getting feedback from prospects on thought leadership piece, apart from sales, of course. Well, I'd be careful about getting feedback from prospects you don't know. And indeed, I think you need to get feedback from people who you have a good relationship with. I think they are the key people to get feedback from, first of all, because they will be judging you in the round on the whole relationship rather than that particular piece. And really, if they're a prospect, you want to be giving them some really strong thought leadership on. Having said that, I would ultimately, there's no reason to, if once you've got the meeting and you're perhaps presenting some insights or things like this, to be dropping in questions such as, how does that strike you? Does that meet with, are you seeing that going on around you? What are the things that particularly stand out that are relevant to your business? But I think it's all about getting feedback from existing clients and trusted people, and I would do this in a structured way, whether this is them filling out a form, or perhaps better, if both of you are able to do this, you have a conversation, but it's very much a structured conversation, rather than a sort of how was it for you type discussion, which I think will be a bit vague. You really want them to tell truth to power on this, not just say, oh yeah, it's pretty good. That doesn't really help. Is it a 3 out of 5? Is it 4 out of 5? Is it a 5 out of 5 on a number of particular things that you want to achieve? So if you want your particular bit to be telling them something new that they don't know already, I would suggest that needs to be in there as a structured question. Next question. Okay, thank you, Michael. This is, what is my experience on podcasts as a channel through promoting management consultancy content as part of a campaign? I have to say on that, my experience is pretty limited on that. what I would say from the one bit of feedback I've had from people who do this sort of thing is that sound quality is really critical. He quoted me research, and I don't know where it was from, but it was ultimately people will put up with a pretty poor quality of video on a video one, but they are, as long as the sound quality is good, but people switch off pretty quickly regardless of the content if the sound quality is bad. So invest in a good Samsung microphone is the only tip I'm afraid I'm able to give from first-hand experience. Okay, time for just a couple more questions. Question, how much do thought leadership campaigns cost? Well, clearly that's a bit of a can of worms. It slightly depends on what you're doing. They can be very cheap. Writing a decent article, firing it off to people on LinkedIn and putting it on your website is pretty inexpensive. Large-scale reports with lots of surveys and evidence that you do a big event around could be quite expensive. What I would say is that often the big cost is surveys for people who go down that route because they're looking to get evidence. If you have data, whether it's analysis or indeed maybe you are a SaaS business and have lots of data within you, or maybe you are a consultancy, and we've done this, who've got lots of field reports over the years that can be analysed. Actually, that's a huge and valuable resource that doesn't cost you anything because you have it already. And we've certainly done campaigns, indeed we've done award-winning campaigns that analyses people's existing data to pull out interesting insights. So that certainly is a big saving if you have that resource in some form. Okay, question here from one of my friends online, which is, where can I buy your book? Well, thank you for asking that question. You can buy it from Amazon. What a lovely question. I like getting those sorts of questions. One more. How hard is it to get into the nationals? Well, I'm going to say it's sometimes it's pretty hard and sometimes it's pretty easy. They Google you and they call you up because it's an area they don't know anyone on, and you look like the expert. Whereas clearly knocking on their door on a busy day with something when they've got to write lots of stuff about Brexit or AI or whatever the topical story of the day is, can be hard work. And so you need to make a bit of a campaign of it, particularly as journalists have large amounts of other people knocking on their door trying to promote their research. And most journalists have been made redundant now, so there is a fraction of the number of them that there used to be. But there is no law that says you need to employ a PR agency, and indeed if you're targeting your local media, it's pretty straightforward. Just pick up the phone. National media, particularly national newspapers, much harder work. So clearly that's why people use us, but there's no law you need to. Okay, we're going to call it a day there. I've got a couple more questions here, so I will include answers to those in I will include them on a blog actually, and send a link to that when we send our email around or in the next couple of days with a link to this recording. So What next should you be doing? Work with colleagues to create a thought leadership definition, build up your thought leadership muscles with blogs, articles, and a discussion dinner, and have a timetable and plan for these. Perhaps get an intern to review what your competitors are doing and do a report for you so you can see how you compare. If you've got initiatives in progress, do a full plan for exploiting your next initiative, or if you have one underway, stop what you're doing and create the plan for exploiting it. Do these and then revisit this webinar for further actions you should be doing. But all the research shows that training, nobody does what they learn unless they do some specific steps early on. So these are your specific steps. Write them down. I'll send them in an email as well, and then make a note to revisit the recording of this webinar in a couple of weeks once you've done these specific steps. Okay, that was Tim Prizeman from Kelso Consulting. Can I thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. Hope you'll find it useful. Please do complete our feedback form, which you will get by email in the very near future. It will only take a couple of minutes or less to complete, and I look forward to either speaking to you in the near future or for you joining me on our other forthcoming webinars, details on our website. Wishing you a very good rest of the day.